Hello. Thank you guys again for tuning in to another episode of Outside the Box, where I aim to help people see that God is bigger than their boxes. Because if we don't see outside of our boxes, then a lot of times we miss God and what He's trying to teach us, and we don't necessarily grow spiritually like we should be. And so, if you guys don't know me, I am your host, Sage the Coach. I am a certified life and relationship coach. I'm also an author. And my show usually airs on Saturdays. My live shows airs on Saturdays at 12 p.m. And so today, before I get started, please like and share and invite. So a lot of people like and share my page, but there's so much stuff on the internet now that it's very, very easy to overlook it, even if you share something. So I'm asking people to now go to my page under the community tab. If you scroll down, you will see invite friends button. I seem to get more likes and followers when people do that than as opposed to just sharing my page. So if you're interested in sharing my page and helping me to spread my positive messages about seeing God outside of our boxes, I do a lot of interviews to encourage people, to inspire people over various different topics. I have a lot of good stuff coming up next month and for the end of this year. And I actually have a Christmas special coming up where I will be giving away some things. And so if you guys are interested in helping me to, spread the love, so to speak, please go under the communities tab on my page and click invite friends and just invite anybody to my page that you think would be interested in what I talk about. And so for today, I have a very, very special guest, and I'm really excited to do this show. I'm not just excited about the topic, but the guest that I have because of the way that she communicates the topic. And so today we will be talking about uncertainty. This uncertainty is it's such a critical part of Christianity because there's a lot of things that you do that you're not certain about. It kind of goes hand in hand with faith, because you won't need faith if you were sure about everything that was going on, that was happening. So I really feel like this is a great topic to discuss, to help people to understand, again, to see God outside of their boxes, how to respond in times of uncertainty, to where we can continue to grow and not get caught up in what we don't know or lose faith because of what we don't know and things like that. And so the guest that I have today that is going to help me communicate that is Camille Sinclair. So I'll bring her on now. Hello. Thank you.
Hi, morning or afternoon, depending on where you're at.
Exactly. I used to do my shows on Monday nights at 7 p.m. And so sometimes I still say good night and I'm like, oh, it's not night anymore. So yeah, wherever you are, good evening, good morning, good night, whatever. So Camille, she contacted me about being a guest on my podcast. Again, I have said this in the past that I get a lot of requests for people to be on my show. Some of them are reoccurring topics, but some of them I really, really get excited about. And I really was excited when I talked to Camille about the topic that she wanted to discuss. And I'm like, yes, we definitely need to talk about that. And I really like the way that she communicated it. But before we go into 5 keys to dealing with the uncertainties of life or dealing with uncertainty in general, Camille, can you please go ahead and introduce yourself and tell the viewers anything that you want to share?
Okay, so my name is Camille Sinclair. I am the CEO of TML Consulting Firm, and the TML stands for the Mobilized Life. And what I do is I function as a movement consultant, and that simply means that I help leaders accelerate their ability to function from their identity and empower them to move forward with purpose and momentum. And part of my background is as a clinical instructor, a researcher, and a physical therapist. And part of what I loved about what I did is I worked with people in pain. I worked with people who were operating through seasons of uncertainty. They had their lives turned upside down in a moment, and how you actually empower people through fear and pain in their lives. And so that probably was the starting space for me to really realize that this was a passion for me.
Hello, are you there?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Here we go.
Okay, go ahead. Now you were saying that the last part of what you're saying that you kind of like in inspiring people to, can you remember where you were?
Well, I was working in Northern Ontario, so I spent a lot of my clinic life working in remote areas. So I worked with a lot of First Nations communities. I did a lot of traveling, and so a lot of my career was spent in underserviced, underpopulated areas with people who were in need but had quite a level of resiliency. So it was learning how to function in sometimes really challenging environments.
Wow. So one thing that, like, when we were talking, that I thought was really interesting was how you connected your you know I'm sorry, you say you are physical therapy. What was the field again? I'm sorry.
Physical therapy.
Physical therapy. Okay,
Yeah.
just to make sure. And so how that connected to what you do to help people on a more spiritual scale, I thought that was really, really interesting. Can you talk about that? I know you kind of went into it a little bit, but could you kind of explain that a little bit more? Because I thought that was really interesting, and it kind of goes to, like, for me, everything I do, I like to reveal the more spiritual aspect of stuff. And so a lot of times people get caught up in, like, the what they can see and what they're going through and stuff like that, but there's always spiritual components and lessons behind the scenes of what we're doing. And I really like that. On the surface, just physical therapy, but then on the spiritual side, you kind of connected that to help people in a spiritual way. Can you kind of explain that a little bit?
Okay. Uh, Part of what I was realizing when I was connecting with patients is that a lot of them had more than just physical issues going on. And part of our training is to look at people from a holistic perspective, that you're actually interacting with a whole person. They might have an injury, but that injury has affected their emotional life. Relationships get impacted. Their fears play havoc on their mental health. So there's so many components that exist in a person. And part of my training is to look at that, recognize where the gaps are, recognize where the problems are, create plans based on what's most important to that individual, and then work through them towards those goals.
Yeah.
And so even within my local church, I was part of the local church leadership. I oversaw the worship teams. I did Bible studies. And I realized that some of those same things existed in our body. There's something to be said after your amen. Right after that Sunday experience, and people have said their amens, that was a good service. And then you ask, so how have you implemented this into your life? And how does that connect with who you are? You'll rarely get a response.
Wow.
And so those things matter to me because one of my favorite phrases that I heard from a friend of mine, Michael Dalton, he would always say, the word works when you work it.
Yes.
So you have to go beyond the amens. And so as I was leading Bible studies, I recognized that I was using skills that I learned in clinic and to help people feel empowered to do something with what they believed, and also to challenge what they believed.
Amen.
Because it's one thing to say it and another thing to have it be a lens through which you function.
Yes, exactly. And I think I really like that. And I think a lot of the times in our Christian walk, that is the difference between, where we are and what God is trying to get us. Because to say stuff is one thing, but to see it in action, what it requires, what sacrifices need to be made, what it looks like, how it translates to other people. He wants us to know the difference between those two things. And that's a part of the growing process when it comes to Christianity. And I do think a lot of people miss that as well. Like, we just get so caught up in, religion, or just thinking that what can God do for us without understanding the process that he's actually taking us through to grow us to see things from a wider, bigger, deeper perspective, and basically from his perspective. And so, yeah, That's so I really like that. I really like that. So now with what you were just saying, now let's jump into this whole uncertainty thing. So the
Yeah.
first thing that I want to ask you, because this is this a program that you have? Because I know you have kind of steps outlined. So I know you have the proper perspective course. Is this part of the proper perspectives course, or what is this five
Well,
keys come
actually,
from?
I had done it as just part of a teaching series that
Okay.
I was doing in my community. And as we were diving into it, I realized there's so much more that each one of these topics contains. So
Yes.
the starting point, which we'll talk about, which is about trusting in the nature of God, had so much in it from the feedback that I was getting. So I
Mm-hmm.
created proper perspectives just to make sure this first point drives
Mm-hmm.
home. Because if we don't start well, we'll finish less than what God intended.
Right,
Right.
right, right.
So for me, it's because of how my clinical brain works, it's not enough just to give you tips. Let's help us function so I can see that your mind is actually working through the material.
Exactly. Oh, I
So
love
we're
that.
growing together.
Exactly. Oh, I love that. You speak into my heart with that one, because I am of course a certified life coach and I'm an author, but even with my books and my coaching, my aim is to make sure you understand the deeper stuff that's going on, how to apply it, how it affects, basically what I just said. And so this is really, really dear to me, the way you have put it together. And I like the kind of steps that you have broken it down to, because and that's a lot of times the disconnection that people have with the Bible. Like you says, it works if you work it, but a lot of people don't know how to work it. Like they read what's in the pages and they recite them, but how does that look? How does that play out in life? And a lot of people miss that connecting those things. And so with what made you tackle uncertainty, though? Do you have any type of experience or story kind of came behind? I want to talk about uncertainty.
Absolutely. So the actual 5 steps kind of came out of a conversation I had with a friend.
Mhm.
And it was at the start of COVID. And we were just sharing about our lives and how the world seemed to be responding. And for me, it was actually a wilderness season is a point of growing in the church.
Mm,
If we're too busy stuck on the wrong conversations,
mm,
we'll miss what God's doing.
mm,
And so that kind of is where the conversation just started.
mhm,
And part of that conversation I had with my friend was around one of the seasons where God asked me to get up and move to a place I didn't know. So at the time, I had my own private practice. I was flying to different communities. I did locum work. But I was in a season where there wasn't more I really wanted to do in the practice I was in or in that area. And one night, God told me that I was going to leave. He gave me roughly when. And I said, okay.
mm.
And so within 4 months, I was away for 2 of those months. So I said, God, you have 2 months to figure it all out. And in those 2 months, I gave up my practice. I transferred my contracts. I sold what I needed to do. And even the money I was supposed to have when I was supposed to move did not come in.
Mm.
And so I had my U-Haul without the cash. And I said, God, you're going to have to make this gas go from one coast to the other, because I said my yes and we're going to do this.
Mm.
And 2 days before I left, what was supposed to sell sold. And I had friends who said God spoke to them and they put thousands of dollars in my hand
Oh my
that I was
goodness!
not
Wow.
anticipating. And even transferring to, because I lived on the East Coast and I was moving to the West Coast.
Mm.
Even then, I didn't know where I was supposed to live or what I was supposed to do. And so I had one friend that lived out in the West Coast. And so I called her, and she's not a believer.
Mm.
But she knows that I am, and we're okay having those conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And I told her, God's called me to move here, but I've never been here before. I don't know where to live. I don't know where to look. I don't even have a job.
Mm.
And so she suggested the island. So I live on Vancouver Island right now.
Mm-hmm.
And when I looked on the island, there was a city that I live in, which is Nanaimo. And I said, do you know what, God? I think this is where you're calling me. If this is you, well, I need a job. and I need a place, and you have about a month and a half to get it done. And about a week later, my friend called me back, and she had a recruitment letter from a clinic that she never gets. And she's in neurology, so a very different area of practice than I do. So she wouldn't get this kind of information. And she called me and said, Camille, I got this recruitment letter, and I think God is telling me it's for you. And I said, you're talking about God? You don't even believe in God. Well, I'm listening.
Wow. Wow.
And it's the clinic that I worked at.
Wow.
And so God provided the job through an unbeliever because of our relationship. And I said, I need a place to live. And I wasn't selling my home, and I didn't have money to carry a second mortgage. So I said, I would love a place I can walk to work. I don't even know where the clinic is. I told him I would like 2 bedrooms with high ceilings, big windows, brand new. I made all these requests, and I found a place exactly like that. And it was walking distance from my work. And so when I got here, people didn't even know the building was there and asked, how did I find it? And I went, let me tell you about that.
Right. Wow. I was expecting a little intro to the uncertainty thing, but that was like way more than I was expecting. And it's so encouraging and inspiring, because I mean, having uncertainty as a Christian is unavoidable. Like, you're going to go through, and I would say most of your Christian walk is uncertain, like maybe 80% of it. You're not really sure what God is doing, what's going on, what you're supposed to be doing, and things like that. And it helps a lot when you learn how to just trust him in that, learn how to follow his lead when you don't know, and things like that. And so I really want to get into this 5 keys for uncertainty. And so if you want to go ahead into the first key of how we can manage uncertainty when we get in those periods, which again is like a lot of the time. So
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And as we're going through this, one of the things I just want to make sure gets highlighted is uncertainty is only uncertain depending on where you look.
Yeah.
And so what God does with us is he makes the unknown knowable because we know him.
Exactly.
So he's literally shifting what we look at to perceive and what we actually look to attach our emotion.
Exactly.
And it's a process. And he's not afraid of it.
Exactly.
He's not afraid of it.
Exactly.
And so in every situation, there's an invitation. So that first key is trust in his nature. Even if we look through scripture, or if you even take a glimpse through your life, God has always been giving us invitations to himself. And one of the things that I love about God is that he calls himself the I am. He is so vast that that's the only way that we can even conceptualize.
Yeah, exactly.
Bit of his greatness.
Yeah.
And then he offers us insights into the aspects of the I am. So we call him Jehovah Jireh, Jehovah Nisi. We call him a provider. We call him a healer. All of these are glimpses into parts of his personhood.
Exactly. Oh my goodness.
Every moment in life, he's inviting us to experience a part of his personhood. Because if he is the source, he'll present himself as the source.
Yeah, exactly.
And so wherever you are, even in an unknown moment, whether it's in a relationship, within your own body, within your marriage, at your workplace, in a decision you need to make, he'll position himself as your solution. Right? And he does it if you look through scripture. It's a constant thing he does.
Yeah.
Behold, I am with you. Do not fear. Behold, I am the God who provides. All those things, he positioned himself by saying, I am.
Wow. So let me say this really quickly. Abigail Liverpool says, hi, Camille. So I just wanted to, say that 1 second. I'm trying to see if there's another comment here. And then we have, I hope I'm saying her name correctly, Kavane Dobbs. She also says that this testimony is so encouraging, Camille Sinclair. So I just wanted to throw those comments in there so you'll know what's being said. I don't know if you can see it or not on your end, but so one of the things that I really like about your first key when it comes to trusting his nature. Um, I know for me, especially when I started out my Christian walk and trying to get to know God, because I just really wanted to understand what was beyond this world, because the world didn't make sense to me. Like there's a lot of crazy stuff going on, people hurting. And so I was just like, there has to be something bigger. And so I just in myself started seeking that. And I actually use that a lot when I talk to people of different faiths or people who become very, very religious in Christianity. I'm like, sometimes you just need to communicate with God, because you need to want to have desire to know the truth. And if you do that, God will show himself to you. When you start trying to filter him through a specific religion or how you do things and things like that, it becomes you can get confused. And so that is, again, it creates a time of uncertainty, because you're like, which one do I choose? But if you just seek God genuinely from your heart and you have a desire to know the truth, he will lead you where you need to go. And so that is how I came to know God. And then through that, he directed me to the Bible and to Christianity and things like that. But you have to have a desire to know the truth. And so I didn't mean to go all into that, but what I wanted to say about what you're saying is that the process of getting to know him, he is in everything. Like we get so caught up in what we see, even ourselves, what's in front of us, other people. We don't see that God is in everything. Like everything exists, is an extension of who he is. So even if you look at nature, it tells you who God is. Like he's a God of order, he's creative, things like that. And so, but the thing that people get caught up on, I think the thing that people get hung up on is that in order to trust in his nature, you have to kind of know who he is, and you have to develop that relationship with him. Because if you tell some people to trust in God's nature, they're looking at the world like where people are killing each other and the world is bad. So how can I trust God? But that God is not just, people's behavior. Like you can't take people's behavior to understand who God is. You have to understand who God is. You have to move those things out of your view, like what you're saying about perspective, and try to understand who God is. And it's not easy. Like you said, he's massive. There's so many different parts of him that he actually has to give us pieces at a time for us to be able to understand who he is. But you have to try to get to know God for yourself. You have to seek the truth for yourself. And you have to put aside anything that's blocking you from doing that. If it's people's behavior that is discouraging you from knowing God, you need to push those people out of your view. If it's religion that's stopping you from seeing God, you need to push that religion out of your view and just seek after God and say, hey, I know there's a being that created me. I want to know you, and just let yourself be open to that. And I know I'm going on kind of a
Yeah,
lot
go for
here.
it.
Yeah. But I think that's important, because you can't lean on trusting his nature if you don't know who he is. And so once you get to know who he is, and you know that he is loving and merciful and kind in spite of what you see, it really gives you a resting place in life when stuff is uncertain and when things are happening around you that you have no control over and they're bad and things like that. It really gives you a resting place, because you know that the creator of the world, his nature is good. Like, he's
Yeah.
good and he's always out for you and stuff like that. And so I really, really like that point. And it has taken me some time, even in my Christian walk. I've been a Christian for 20 years, to learn how to do that, because I will question and say, well, God, how can I trust you? How can I know that you're not going to do this? You're not going to do that. And I remember one thing he told me, he said, I'm not a man. Like, I'm not a man. I'm not the people that you see. I'm bigger than that. And I'm like, oh, okay. So it was just a process of getting to know him. So yes, amen on that first point. So thank you for that. Is there anything you kind of want to add to that before we move on to the second one?
I think for some of us, we never question what part of his nature he's offering, but sometimes we're not sure if we know that we know. And so, one kind of marker that has helped me kind of differentiate areas that he might be inviting me into is actually a verse found in Romans, and it talks about the kingdom being about righteousness, peace, and joy. And so I say, use that as your filter. If you're going through something, and righteousness has to actually to do about your identity, because it's made you righteous. So if you look at your process and feel like you're less than, that's an area he might be putting his finger on.
Yeah.
And he's the more than God. So that more might be something he's trying to get to you.
Mm-hmm.
Or peace, if feel like you've lost your peace, well, he's the peace giver.
Mm-hmm.
And joy, which is not situational. All those things are realities of the nature of the kingdom of God. And
Amen.
if any of those things are disturbed, recognize there's an invitation there, because
Yeah.
he's the answer that brings those things.
Exactly.
So if your mind goes to, well, he might be angry. Well, does that anger match righteousness, peace, and joy? He's not double-minded.
Mm-hmm.
If they do, there's something wrong with the way that you're thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Return to righteousness, peace, and joy. And he'll help you in that. He's not
Exactly.
afraid of your mess.
Exactly.
He's not afraid with where you're at.
Exactly.
For me, that's a good marker.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good, because a lot of times, especially like what you're saying with what we see, because that's the major contradiction to the nature of God, because we're focusing on what we see. And it's very easy to say, but, and get caught up in our feelings and things like that, instead of understanding that God is stable. Like, he doesn't change. If he did, then the world would be constantly changing and moving, and we can't survive in a place like that. And so he's the foundation. He's the rock. He's stable. He doesn't change. His mood doesn't change. And then he's like, okay, I'm done with the world.
Come
You
on.
guys, so we have to learn how to look past that and understand that, especially, our feelings are not an indicator of who God is. Like,
Absolutely.
so you realign your thinking back to him. And the Bible talks about be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Is like, take control of your mind to understand that despite how you feel, despite what you see, despite what you're going through, this is still God and he doesn't change. And when you grab a hold of that, it changes your perspective on those things to where you understand that they are not as big, as scary as as they seem. And so definitely, I mean, great point. So wow, thank you for that. So the second one.
And the second point is called cultivating thankfulness. So you need to cultivate thankfulness. And I actually believe that thankfulness opens up the realities of the kingdom to have impact on the earth. Like, when you cultivate that, it's literally an open door that you're creating. And sometimes when you look at, what I'm trying to say, actually, a good thing to start off with is, if you think back to when the Israelites were in the desert, they come out of Egypt, they're wandering in the desert because of choices they've chosen. And God gives Moses instructions on how to organize the tribes. And in the front, the leading tribe that gets sent out is Judah, right? And Judah actually means thankfulness and praise. Both of those words together reflect Judah. So the thing that you start off with, what leads the charge, what allows the presence of God to go with you, is thankfulness and praise. It literally repositions how you set your heart, and it helps direct how you eventually speak. Because one of the realities is that the kingdom is where it activated. And you don't deny your process, you don't deny your emotions, but you don't stop with expressing them. You guide them towards a thankful place.
Yeah.
And so it really becomes an open door.
Yeah. So let me see. I really like this point as well. Because I my last show I talked about depression, Christianity depression, and how I struggled with depression for a very, very long time. I would say probably from about 12 or 13 years old, well into my late 20s, I struggled with depression. And I know that's probably not usual, but that's my story.
Yeah.
And with that depression, it was always negative thoughts all the time. Like, of course, that's kind of what brings depression on, is kind of negative thinking. And when God finally broke that, because it had to be kind of broken in stages, because there was so much going on inside of me to understand where those thoughts were coming from, that when I actually got to a point where it was completely broken, I understood thankfulness in a way that I did not understand it before, because negative thinking kind of puts your brain in a fog. And so it becomes difficult to see outside of it. And that's basically, to me, I see depression, especially in the spirit, like a fog that's surrounding you and you can't see past it. But thankfulness takes you outside of that fog. Like it stops you from just looking at what's in front of you or not being able to see what's in front of you and seeing beyond that. And so once God completely broke the depression over me, it will try to come back. And that's something that I think a lot of people who struggle with their Christian walk, they feel like when God gets them through something, it should be over and that's it. And they shouldn't have any problems with. But the devil is always going to try to bring the stuff that had a hold on you before, because he know it worked when it had a hold on you before. So he's always going to try to bring it back. And so even though God broke the depression over me, there were times that it would try to come back. And the way that I would kind of stop it and keep it at bay was through thankfulness. I would just focus on like, I know God is good. I know what he's done for me. I know he's there. I mean, and it just opened up my mind to see God in so many things. So like the fact that I have eyes and I can open my eyes and see what I want to see. It's something to be grateful for. The fact that I have legs and that when I wake up in the morning, I can walk and go in the kitchen and get me something to eat. Like it's so many things to be grateful for in this life. And we get so caught up in our disappointments and things that we don't like. That when you open your mind to see beyond the negative and things like that, God is like, he's everywhere. Like, oh my goodness, he's everywhere. Like even sometimes I look at my kids and I'm like, God designed their faces. Like, he designed the eyebrows to be over the eyes. Like, wow, God is awesome, And so you can just really see him in everything. And that's what thankfulness does. So anytime depression starts trying to creep back, which I haven't had an issue with that in a long time, let me add, the way to see God in everything is through thankfulness. And so I totally agree. It's a very, very powerful thing. Yeah. And it's one of the things that when you're being negative, why your mind resists it. Like your mind is like, no, I don't want to be positive. I don't want to be happy. I don't want to think about good stuff. That thing that's resisting it is exactly why you got to push past it, because it knows that thankfulness, your spirit or whoever's stopping you, demons or whatever, trying to stop you from being positive, knows the power of thankfulness. And so, so that's really, really, man, it's just a blessing to me to understand what that really means.
That's good.
Okay. Somebody, Kavani Dobbs, is she, do you know her? Because she's posting your tips in the comments. She put
come on.
Yeah, she put number 1, trust in his nature. Number 2, guide emotions towards a thankful place. Okay, so yeah, gratefulness. So thanks for Kavane is giving you guys a summary in the comments. Yeah, so make sure you guys are taking notes. So yeah. Okay, did you have anything you wanted to add to that based on kind of what I said, or do you want to move on to the third point?
I think you spoke that wonderfully in the sense that like thankfulness actually turns into worship.
Yeah.
So exactly. Even when the enemy starts to, and you sometimes feel like, I don't even feel like worship, that's the spot to start.
Exactly.
Because it'll open up into that worship space, and the enemy doesn't like it. So go for it.
Exactly.
And honestly, even the clinical research side of things with thankfulness, it's actually proven to increase your problem solving ability. It creates longevity. It actually clears your mind so you can be more creative.
Exactly.
And so it also over time builds your resiliency. So all these things have an internal physical, spiritual, as well as a mental health component.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of God, because when he told us to be thankful,
he knew.
We didn't know he was like, it'll do all this, it'll improve your thinking, all the stuff you said. We're not thinking about that. We're just thinking about how we feel. But that's the beauty of God, that even that simple statement has so many benefits and affects so many things. But that's the mind of God for you right there. So, and so the third point.
The third point is remember. Remember. It reminds me of a movie that says, remember, the 5th of November.
That's one of my favorite movies, actually.
I think it's V for Vendetta.
Yeah, it's a great movie, yeah.
But I call this the pivot point in uncertainty, because there's moments where you feel like you're gaining this momentum, right? God's nature is good, and I'm so thankful. And then you're going to have a challenge come in.
Exactly.
In this process. And this is where I call it the pivot key, because you need to remember. Because this is the point where deception can come in.
Exactly. Oh my goodness, yes.
And in remembering, I always say record what God has spoken. Keep a record. Whether it's if you're a journaler, sometimes I use the audio tool on my phone just to share a word. If you're an artist, do a little pictorial picture that'll trick your mind.
Yes.
Whatever it is, keep a record, because the enemy is going to challenge what you've heard.
Yeah.
And he did it with Eve in the garden. He misquoted God, and she did too. Right? So this is where that deception seeps in if you've misremembered what God has said.
Exactly.
And
Oh
so
my goodness.
remember.
The 5th of November.
Yeah. And also in that, make sure you have people around you who know who you are.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Because they can taint what God has told you if they're going to tell you their opinion. We're not looking for man's opinion. We're looking for people who have your heart and hear God.
And that can help to remind you. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So even when you have gone through things like grief and it's shattering and there's trauma attached to it, you're just doing as much as you can just to exist. In those moments, you have to have people who won't just
tell you what you want to hear.
Exactly. They'll love you. They'll be silent for you. But even in their prayer times, like, I know this person is called to change nations. I see them in this moment, but that is not the truth of what they've been designed to be. Thank you, God, that they're going through process, but I am not stuck on their process. I am going to speak the truth about what they've been designed to be. Like, you need people like that, because they'll help you remember.
Exactly. Oh my goodness. So I'm laughing when you were saying that, because I'm a writer. I said before, I'm an author. And I have history with depression. And so what I would do is write letters to myself in those moments that God was clear to me, because again, and that's what uncertainty kind of does. It kind of blurs your view of God a little bit. And so I would write in those moments letters to myself where God was very, very clear to me. His spirit was very with me, present. And then I would go back and read those letters, and I would write them like I'm talking to myself. I would say, girl, you better blah, 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 because God is this. Remember when he did this and did this. And, and so when I was having down moments or doubtful moments or things like that, I would go back and read those letters and be like, yes, yeah, like what am I doing? Like, yes, I know who God is. So that's really, really powerful. And a lot of this that you're saying goes back to, actually, all of it comes back to the power of the mind, and the mind that God gave us to control and to think and to make choices, which I have said before is a godlike quality. There's nothing else on earth that has the awareness, the self-awareness, the ability to reason and make choices like we do. And it is a godlike quality. When God said, let us make man in our image, one of those things is we have a mind like God. We can think, we can reason, we're aware of who we are and things like that. And so it's like God is teaching you how to harness the power that he's given you with your mind. And so, and remembering is very, very important for that, because we do forget, like, especially we get caught up in what we feel and what we're going through. Like, oh my goodness, the goodness of God could be like on the other side of the world for all we can see. And it's good to bring those things back with your mind and understand that, yes, he's still there even in those moments. He still loves you, and that he has a purpose for what you're going through. Like, it's not happening for no reason. And a lot of times we like, oh, why is this happening to me? Things like that. We don't ask it with an expectation of an answer, but there's actually an answer to everything and why it happens if you're a child of God. And if you can take a step back and kind of keep God the focus, you'll see that lesson faster, which usually means you'll get through the problem a little bit quicker. So absolutely. And then the point you made about who you have around you. Oh my goodness. Like, these are really, really powerful things that will make or break your Christian walk. Like, seriously, if you don't have the right people around you, if you don't remember who God is, if you don't remember his nature, like, there's really no way you can sustain a long-term relationship with God without even the 3 points that you've pulled out so far. So absolutely, like, wow. So anyway, to the fourth, did you have anything you wanted to add?
And to remember, probably there's three things I like to do that's helped me. I know people do different things,
Mm-hmm.
but one is I take communion.
Mm.
So for me, it's a reminder of the covenant I have with him, that I'm not trying to force him to do something.
Mm.
He actually wants to delight in me. He wants to walk with me. I'm literally made in his image.
Mm.
And he looks at me and goes, "Oh, I made this one well.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
we're doing this together."
Mm.
So this uncertainty is actually an opportunity for me to shift my eyes,
Exactly.
because I'm only uncertain because I looked away.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
So I take communion. Um, I have a book of prophetic words that I receive. So depending on people's backgrounds and how they feel about that, I highly value prophetic words that connect with my spirit. And so I have a book just dedicated to those. And every 1 or 2 months, I read them through, because sometimes it's recognizing which season you're in,
Mm.
because
Mm.
something may have shifted and it's not the enemy.
Mm.
It could be God saying, "Remember what I've told you? I'm
Mm.
actually answering a prayer.
Mm.
Go back."
Mm.
So I go back and see what's hitting. This actually matches a season that's shifting, which feels like it's uncertain, but it's actually an answer to prayer.
Exactly. Exactly.
So
Wow.
that's part of that remember.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the third things that I do in this process is I read my Bible more.
Mm.
And I do that because there might be certain characters or certain stories that are connecting with me. And
Mm.
God might say, just as I did with this person, this is an example of what I'm doing with you. So
Mm.
even if you don't have a prophetic journal,
Mm.
look into the book. It's a prophetic book,
Mm. Mm.
to see where you can connect. So you'll remember what God has done, so you don't let go of it in the process.
Yeah, yeah. And one thing that you just said about when you become uncertain is because you kind of took your eyes off. And one of the things that I have experienced is that because this is a process, and like you said, like where we start from, because we're so far from the perfect nature of God, that life is actually a process to refine us and getting back to where we were intended to be. That a lot of times that uncertainty can come from Him taking you getting to know him more deeply. And so just like what you said about I'm trying to think of an example you gave, but okay, so you might understand the goodness of God. So okay, so let's talk about the goodness of God, and God
Mhm.
demonstrates that to you. That is just the tip of the iceberg. It's always just the tip. And so he might want you to understand his goodness on a second grade level, but now here come uncertain times, because now he wants you to go to the fourth grade level with understanding his goodness. And then
Yeah.
you have the fifth grade and the sixth grade and the college and the doctorate. So like it's a long journey, but each journey reveals his nature to you in a deeper, deeper way. Because I know there are times where, especially when I first became a Christian, it's like I said, you say the words, God loves me, yeah, and you know what that means generally. But as you begin to walk with God and you understand through different experiences what that really means for God to love you, it's like, oh my goodness, like
Big.
yeah, it like breaks you down, like me, like oh my goodness. And so, but I wouldn't have understand, and I know I still don't totally understand the extent to which God loves me, but I know I understand it more than I did before, and I can see the process of that journey with learning more deeply and going deeper and deeper and deeper and understanding what that means. So we might know he's a healer over here, but then he'll say, okay, let me show you how far I can heal. You might think, oh, he can heal my physical body, but then God's like, no, I can heal you mentally and emotionally and spiritually too. And so, yeah, it's definitely goes in you, he draws you in closer to understanding him even more. So absolutely. And I really think that's interesting. So you take communion not at church by yourself. So you kind of do communion. How often do you do that?
Whenever I want.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah,
no religious time frame that he gave, so I don't have to conform to anyone else's.
exactly. Oh, I love
Um,
that. I love
I
that.
do it whenever I want. Usually around Easter, I like to take 40 days just because it's the choice I've chosen.
Yeah.
And there's seasons when I just want to.
Yeah,
So I do.
exactly. Exactly. Oh, I love that. And so, and I think what's important is that It's not the crackers and the juice. It's what it symbolizes. It's what it speaks to your spirit. And so I really like that. And I can see myself. I've never taken communion outside of church before. Actually, the thought never came to my mind before. And so that's the thing about outside the box, because you don't think of some certain things, and but once you're exposed to other people's ideas, it's like, oh, why didn't I think of that? Like, wow, that's cool. And I definitely am going to be doing that outside of church more often. But I think that's cool. So thank you so much for that.
Absolutely. The
Yeah,
only direction was to do it in remembrance of him.
exactly,
That was the only thing.
exactly. Yeah. And so here we go for the fourth point
Is pray from identity. Pray from identity. And a lot of what we've kind of talked up till now has to do with our thinking, our perspective, so we perceive correctly. Now we actually have to say something. We have to attach that perspective with how we speak. And I say pray from identity because we can pray to God, but we can sometimes step outside of who he's made us to be, as if we need him to break through the enemy to come rescue us. When sometimes he's saying, I gave you everything. You're seated with me in heavenly places. Reposition your mind so you pray from a position of authority. Sometimes God, I need help is valuable, but if that's all you say in uncertainty, you haven't grown up.
Oh, wow. Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness.
You
Go
haven't
ahead.
grown up. Because really, that maturing means agreement with God's perspective. Agreement with God. That's my simple definition. Maturity is agreement with God. And if he sees from victory and you're always praying for help, what are you actually partnering to release? There's an incongruency with your understanding of who you are.
Exactly. Oh my goodness. Wow. You saying some powerful stuff here. Because okay, let me go back again. I struggle with depression. So a lot of my prayers when I first became a Christian were just crying to God like all the time. And I always said, and I've said this before, and even in other interviews, if God has nerves, I'm sure I got on them. Because I would just cry and cry and cry and cry. And so when I actually got to a point where he matured me and I didn't have stuff to cry about anymore, I didn't know how to talk to God anymore. I'm like, okay, so now it's like sitting in a room with somebody and you're just sitting there like, okay, what do we talk about now? Like, and so I knew then that I had to learn how to communicate with him outside of my trauma and outside of my anguish and my depression and things like that. And so absolutely, like, wow, and I wouldn't have even like understood it the way you were saying it now, like to pray for your identity. I didn't understand it in that way, but I recognize what you're saying from my own experience of like always crying and crying, crying, and then actually getting to a place where I'm talking to God from the growth that he has done in me. It's like we're communicating differently. And a lot of times I like to look at the different stages of relationships in humanity. So from a child, you kind of have somebody taking care of you. Then a young adult, you start kind of learning how to take care of yourself and learning what that means and what parts of your parents' upbringing you need to embrace and grow and what parts you need to get rid of. Then you move on to like a marriage relationship where you're now learning how to see life from a deeper perspective and partnering with another person. I see all of these as our relationship process with God. Like, first, we start off as babies, and he kind of takes care of us. Then we kind of grow up, and we learn how to, live from not from milk all the time, and we learn how to eat on our own, and then you have the marriage relationship, which is all throughout the Bible. God calls the church his bride, where we have a much more mature relationship with God. We're partnering with him more, and not necessarily in those beginning stages. And so that's like, man, you are saying some deep stuff that, I mean, we can talk for like months just to dive into each one of these and really explore them, because they're very important and very, very crucial to growing as a Christian. Like, you can't really grow as a Christian and begin to understand God if you don't do these things. And I've seen a lot of people, baby Christians for 10, 20 years, they're not growing, they're staying in the same place, they're going through the same stuff. And if you keep going through the same stuff over and over again, whether it's me, like you keep crying, like you said, it's a sign that you're not growing, like you're not growing. And you need to kind of pivot, change your thinking so that you can grow. So powerful, powerful, powerful. I love it. I love it. Yeah.
And I love that God will pick different areas of ourselves to grow.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so you might be someone who's like, I believe God heals. Yeah, I did pray for that person and they were fine. This person didn't, but I know God's good. You have this kind of growing maturity in that. But when it comes to your finances, my goodness, the first thing, and you're crumbling, God, what am I going to do? The bank account doesn't look right. How am I supposed to do things with God? What's going to happen with my family? We go into these tailspins in one area of his nature.
Yeah.
Like, I got this.
Yeah.
But here, and he's not upset with you.
Yeah, he understands.
He goes,
yeah.
Well, let me build your ability to see me as a provider, remember who I am, go through all of those other steps. Now, attach what you say with this truth about who I am now. Let's grow your maturity in this part of your life and understanding. So we're all at these different stages and all these different aspects of ourselves. So there's always a place of growth.
Exactly. Always. I mean, I was telling my kids the other day that we can't complete the process of growth in our lifetimes. Like it's not possible. And then I think about the people in the Bible who were living 800,000-900,000 years. They were still not complete the process of growth. And so it's definitely always a place you can grow in. So for anybody that might be watching this, like, well, I got it together. I will admit that I have thought that, like, I'm especially coming from depression and being all broken and stuff like that. I get to a place of peace and maturity that I haven't been. And I'm like, oh yeah, I got it. No, you don't. Like,
There's more.
And then God will show me like, okay, you might have it, like you said, in this area, but you still need to grow over here. And it's like, oh my goodness, I thought I had it. And so you always should be growing. God is always trying to teach you something. And it's always to make you a better person. Like once you complete those obstacles and you learn those lessons, like I would get to a place where I would be like, wow, I've never had peace like this before. This is great. But there's more. And then there's more. And then there's more. And it's like, it becomes a little bit overwhelming. Yeah, but in a good way. It becomes, it's like, oh, and then you see God like, wow, this is just a piece of who you are. What is on the other side? Like, this is a lot,
Yeah.
And so absolutely, it's man.
It's fun. Life with God is fun.
Oh, it is. It's funny because I was just talking to somebody the other day in a meeting, and this is just a little quick story that we can move on. When I was first like trying to really get my life together and live for God, I was about in my early 20s. And so this is my first time of like being by myself, no friends, not doing the crazy stuff that I was doing to cope or whatever. And I was just alone. And, at the time I had a child and reading my Bible, and I felt like life was really boring. And then I said to myself, God is boring. Oh my goodness, And so I went to a Bible study later that day, maybe later in the week, I'm not sure. And there was a lady, her name was Beth Moore, and we started the Bible study video. And the first thing she said was, before I get started today, I just want to say one thing for anybody who may have been thinking this. She said, God is not boring. I almost fell out of my chair like, oh my goodness. I mean, you really feel like, God is watching you even when you think you're alone. I'm like, oh my goodness. And I never said that again. So, but anyway, so on to the fifth point is, go ahead. You can. Go ahead.
The fifth point is to build, which is the action. Yeah. There's always a doing part to our faith. There is a work attached to this faith journey.
Yeah.
If it's not, it's just a mental agreement.
Yeah.
But to build means that even in uncertainty, and remember the uncertain thing is that you looked away. Once you look to him, there's a solution.
Exactly.
And there's permission to activate it by building something. And for me, I kind of made it as a bit of an acronym because I was reading through Jeremiah, And we all know the verse 29:11, right? For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord, plans to prosper you, give you a hope and a future.
Yeah.
And we love quoting that.
Mm.
But there's stuff before that happens, right? So before that happens, Israel has now been brought into captivity. They're in Babylon. And Babylon is actually the site where the Tower of Babel was, right? Where God confused the languages as they were building a temple building a tower to reach God on their own terms. And so the Israelites knew that as a place of confusion. So they're now taken out of their land, brought into a place of confusion that they now have to exist in. Like sometimes, if you can even stop to consider, they've seen their family members brutalized. Things they loved have been upheaved. They're moved from everything they assumed was foundational to them. Their land has been taken. People that they hated now have ownership of them. Like, can you imagine the emotional, the mental toll
Yeah, exactly.
that would have been to a people? And they're in a place that they know is confusion. This is where they've been called to exist in now. And into that environment, through Jeremiah, he sends these two men to give a message to all of Israel from God. And he tells them to do certain things, and I call it the build. First, he says to build houses and dwell in them. So in the place of confusion, you get to create order. You get to find a place where you can place a dwelling which produces this grounding place, this order in the midst of chaos. And so for me, that means wherever you are, you're literally the living dwelling place of the Holy Spirit. Wherever you go, you bring order. You have permission to bring order. And so you have the permission to build a house and dwell. And he tells them to utilize their skills to plant and produce. They had something that they could do to produce in the midst of confusion. And for me, that means there is something that you may not know, but right now you're equipped to do something. He's already prepared you. He's already equipped you. You might not be aware of it, but it's there. So in my mind, I think, if you're someone who says, well, I don't know where I'm going to get my money from. I don't know what to do. I lost my job. I don't have any skills. Well, that's a lie. If you break pies, you have a skill. Like, you might not see it as valuable, but it might lead to something. You always have something in your hand. So utilize your skill.
Yeah, that reminds me of many stories in the Old Testament where God always used what people had. And it seemed like meaningless, everyday items that they didn't think much of, but he used it and partnered with them, because it wasn't just the I'm thinking of the lady that had the jar. She had God told her to fill the jars with oil. Yeah. And it wasn't just that. It was it's faith, the faith to step out and use what you have, what you see, and do something with it. And then God blesses that thing, because we have to be like, one of our main purposes on earth is to manifest spiritual truths. That's what we're here to do. But we can't do that. Manifestation requires action. Like, you can't manifest anything if you don't do anything. And so when you think about the seed that's in the ground, if the seed doesn't grow, nothing is going to show on the top. So you have to be doing something. You have to give God something to work with and to bless and to partner with you on, because not doing anything is actually one of the definitions, in my opinion, of death. Like, death is nothing. There's no action. There's no life. There's nothing growing. There's nothing moving. And we're not doing that. You're operating in a state of death, actually. And so that's really important, because like you said, and it goes even back to the gratitude thing, because when you are grateful, you can start to see the things that you have that you're not really paying attention to or think very much of. So for example, like I was saying about the fact that I can get up and walk. Like, some people can't get up and walk. There are some things that God created, like a tree. It can't walk. It just sits there in the ground. But if I want to do something, I have the ability to walk and go and do it. And that's a blessing. But if you're not looking at that God in a grateful way, or looking from a place from gratitude, you're not going to see even those small things that you take for granted, like
Amen.
walking or looking or seeing, to know, okay, I can do something. I can go over here. I can, move this. And like you said, everybody has skills. Everybody has gifts. Everybody has abilities. God is not going to create beings as intelligent as we are and then give you no gifts at all. Like, you have something. And so it's
Absolutely.
up to you, through grateful eyes, which opens your ability to see that, to use those things. And then God partners with you to manifest whatever principles, like what you said, order, which is a part of his nature, into, manifesting something good in the earth. And so really quickly, I want to touch on order, because it's really important. God is a God of order. Without order, the universe wouldn't even exist. And when the Bible talks about lawlessness being, the big part of how sin is described, it's people operating outside of God's order. You're not operating in the order that he created the universe with. You're out of
Mhm.
whack. You need to come back into the fold, because the way he created it is the perfect way for everything to work. And so they use these things. You use the ability that God gave you, the gifts he gave you, the materials that he has for you, to create a principle or manifest a principle that reveals who God is, because now they can see God more clearly, because now they're surrounded by all this, like you said, misfortune, all this stuff is happening. But through being able to build and things like that, it's like you understand that God is still present, even when stuff around you is not going the way you want it to go. And so, great point. Wow. I mean, you should be like a Bible teacher or something. I mean, I know you said you ran Bible studies and things like that. I don't know if you still do that, but this stuff is golden. Like, seriously. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. I
Yeah.
love it. I do love the Bible makes me happy.
Yeah. Definitely. I second that. So, and so, let me see. We went through the 5 points. So the first one was, and again, for anybody who is looking in the comments, Kavane has spelled them out. She still went through she did the fourth point, pray for my identity. She talked about maturity, agreement with God, build, the faith in action, which is right on point. And so these are the 5 points. So if anybody is watching and you have any questions, because we're going to wrap up here soon, if you have any questions for Camille to answer about anything that she said, you can go ahead and put those in the comments now, and we will try to get you some answers for that. And is there anything else you kind of wanted to add while we're waiting to see if anybody asks any questions?
Probably just to say, even with all these 5 keys, don't make them into the law. There are things that to help you in your journey with God. There are principles that he's revealed in people's lives and through scripture, but it's never meant to be a burden for which you need to carry.
Yeah,
So at
absolutely.
any moment, recognize that he's always inviting you in, and don't get stuck in your process. I think it's a big key. Don't allow what's happening in a moment to allow you to turn your eyes away from who's with you and who you are. And so if you don't remember anything else, you have permission to see him, permission to be you, and permission to build.
Yeah.
So be encouraged.
Yeah. Wow. And like, even what you were saying about not to get stuck on it, it's like, this is my whole premise behind Outside the Box, because God was never where I expected him to be ever. Like, in my life, you expect him to come a certain way, act a certain way, do a certain thing. You expect him to bless whatever ideas you come up with. You say, oh God, I want to do this, bless it, but he never appeared to me, or the lesson that I gained from whatever he was taking me through was never what I was thinking. It was never what I was expecting. It was never the outcome that I was looking for. And so if you just, even with these, because people do that, and actually that's where religion comes from, when you're looking at what makes sense to you, and you don't look outside of that. So even if you look at these 5 points and you just stay glued to this, and you don't do this, and then God becomes filtered through this, instead of you understanding that this is just a small piece for you to understand the bigger picture. To me, that's how that religious mentality comes in. You can get lost and idolize a process, instead of idolizing God and getting to know God in the process, because the process is not God. God is just a part of it. Everything that he does, like what you were saying about our perspective, or widen our perspective, or even me with outside the box, thinking outside of what you not being so glued to what you're thinking and being open to what's outside of your box. It all is to teach us who God is. That's all it is, to teach us who God is. And the more we know who he is, the more freer we are, the more fulfilled we are, the more we understand who we are, we understand our purpose. Like, it just opens up your life to a lot of things that a lot of times we don't really think about. Like, it's to fulfill us in so many ways. And so we have to be able to not see the process, but understand that what's going on is bigger than the process. And so I think that's very important as well. So I don't see any questions coming in here. We're getting to the time, which is let me see, it's 1:06 now. And so you guys, Camille, you can talk about a little bit more. She has a course on her website, the Mobilized Life, called Proper Perspectives. Do you want to talk about that a little bit and let people know in case they want to sign up? Because I mean, I feel like this information that you're giving here is golden. Like, everybody needs to know this. This is one of those things that even if you are a seasoned Christian like me, or I'm sure you can never go wrong going through this stuff again. Like, you need to be reminded, like we talk about, remember.
Yeah.
You need to go through this stuff again and always refresh your mind, because there are very, very important keys to having a successful spiritual life or relationship with God. So can you talk about your Proper Perspective courses a little bit?
Absolutely. So the Proper Perspective course is an online course, and once you sign up, you have access for life. So you kind of go through it at your own pace. I do recommend doing it within a 3-week time frame, because you build momentum, and you just want to make sure that you're building momentum through the process. And it's really about helping leaders, and anyone who is in Christ, you are now a leader. And it's to help us reinforce or discover perspectives that allow us to live a mobilized life. And it really is based on 3 key areas, which is around a perspective of God, a perspective about ourselves, and a perspective of the kingdom. And for me, that's so valuable, because in kind of our culture right now, there's this tendency to use church and kingdom as the same thing, and they're not. They're not synonyms. And so it kind of dives into a little bit of the groundwork of what the kingdom is. And I usually say, people are like, I'm not sure if that's true, Camille. I say, then where do angels exist? Do they exist in the kingdom of God? And they do, but they're not the bride of Christ. They're not the church, but they're part of the kingdom. So we have to understand the interplay of those 2 things. And so part of that is really enforcing some of those truths, so we start from a healthy foundation. And I think it's just a really great place to reinforce, even as leaders. Oftentimes, and I've kind of grown up around church leadership and pastors and ministers, that they're often giving and not pouring, or they will never challenge their foundations to see what areas they need to reinforce. So give yourself permission to do that without questioning the position that you have.
Wow. Like, okay, so you guys, the link to her course is in the comments if anybody's interested in signing up. And so, I mean, I really, the way that you kind of understand the Bible, especially the way that you communicate it, I really think you have some gifting in that area. So where do you think that just comes from? Do you kind of consider it a gift, or like you say, you kind of grew up around ministry and things like that? So how do you think you've come to like understand things in a way that you can communicate it so clearly?
I think it's part of a gifting I have. I think it's sitting under other people who are great teachers and preachers and communicators. And I think part of it's clinical, because I have to be able to take complex ideas and communicate them in understandable and actionable forms for people who are also going through things. So part of that is just training, and it's something that I love. I love when people can take an idea, apply it, and understand it for themselves. I think part of it, I don't want people who follow me for the sake of following me. That's not joy for me. It's follow me so you get empowered, so you can go, so other people can follow you.
Exactly. Wow. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. And so I think that's part of how I've been gifted.
Yeah. It's really good, and it has me stirred up. And you know, it's just really important a lot of these things. And like what you were saying, even when it comes to, the church culture, which can sometimes become an idol in and of itself, we start kind of worshiping the church instead of actually growing a relationship with God and growing spiritually like we're supposed to be. We get caught up in all these labels and how we look to each other and what we're doing and being in the front, the person that's teaching and stuff like that, that we kind of miss a lot of stuff too. And so it's always good to have, just basically kind of like basic and clear ways of understanding our spiritual journey. And I think these 5 keys that you spelled out really does a very good job of like putting your focus back where it should be. It's not on your title, what you're doing. And a lot of people, I think, even idolize their calling. Like they just want to go out and do what God has them to do. But doing that is a byproduct of you growing here first. Like you can't really even do that effectively if you're not growing spiritually, your relationship with God and things like that. And so I really like these 5 keys because it's like it puts your focus back where it should be, not on all this other stuff that we get caught up in. So I love it. And I think if you don't, I know you have the proper perspective course, but you definitely need a 5 keys to navigating uncertainty course because this is really good information. And I'm like even excited to see what else you do. Like do you have any other courses, or do you teach on any other things or talk about any other type of things?
Well, part of what I'm going to be releasing next year actually is what I call the mobilize method. So taking kingdom principles, things that are through the Bible, but communicating them in non-Christianese language about how to mobilize from within. So how do you practically bring momentum in through your life so you can lead from that place? So you can affect your organization, your family structure, where you've been called to serve from this place where you're ever growing in freedom. So that's what I'll be releasing into the new year. And I also am a consultant. So people actually connect with me one-on-one. And it's in that space because I have a heart for leaders. I think they need a healthy place to process if they're not denied honor. And so they're not saying, well, you can't function because you're processing. But hold on, let's establish who you are so you continue to lead because your life affects other lives.
Yeah. Wow.
And so that's something that's a passion for me, is to see healthy leaders lead. And so they connect with me one-on-one, and we can kind of organize what that picture looks like individually or go through packages. And part of that is really having a discovery call. So I usually tell people, if you're not certain, start with a discovery call. So we can see if we're the right connection, if we're the right fit for each other. And then we kind of go and create an action plan based on what your needs are, and have accountability calls to see how are you progressing, what are the areas of need, how are we needing to shift things, and then how are we adjusting the goals that we're aiming for based on what God's doing in your life in the moment. So that's part of what I offer as a movement consultant.
Yeah. Wow. This sounds really good. And so now I don't know if we had this conversation before, because I know you were in physical therapy and you told me about the consultation stuff, but are you a coach? Because that sounds like coaching. So you can coach without calling yourself a coach anyway, but do you have like any type of certification in coaching, or do you consider yourself a coach, or are you more like kind of stick to the title of consultant?
I'm going to stick with the title of consultant because I think it more fits to the variety of things that I enjoy.
Okay.
But I am getting certified as a life coach over the next month or two.
Okay.
But a lot of those elements are part of what we get taught as physical therapists.
Okay.
In terms of the recognition of different socioeconomic issues, areas that impact people's lives, from the spiritual to the physical, to relationship, to sexual health. All of those components are part of how we deal with clients holistically.
Okay. Wow. You have a lot going on. I'm definitely going to stay in contact and see what else you have coming out. And if you ever want to come back, like when your new program starts and you want to kind of do a show about that, I'm totally open to it. I definitely think you are gifted. I am so inspired by the conversation that we have today. And, to even, kind of fine tune some of my own stuff that I have out there. And so it's really, really good. So thank you so much for coming on. I really, really appreciate your time. And I'm trying to think, am I forgetting anything? And I don't think I am. So I'll go ahead and let you go. So thanks again so much, Camille, and definitely keep in touch, and I'll keep tabs with you. And if you want to come back on, let me know. And I guess that's it for Outside the Box today, you guys. Tune in next week. I'm going to be having another Let's Talk About Relationships segment where me and a group of wives will be discussing the things that we wish somebody would have told us about marriage before we got married. So if you guys
I
want
might
to tune
catch
in
that
for
one.
so if you want to tune in for that, that will be next Saturday at 12 p.m. And again, I have a lot of stuff coming up. So make sure you like, share, invite, follow my page. And thank you again for tuning in to Outside the Box. And I hope that the conversation today helped you to think a little bit more outside of the box that you have, because we all have them. So thanks again, Camille. And you guys have a good weekend. Bye.
Bye for now.